Excuse me, everyone. Could I have your attention for a moment? Actually, ask for your attention for more than a moment. Thank you all for getting here for lunch so quickly. It's my pleasure to introduce Senator Tannas, who is our speaker, our featured speaker today for lunch. Many of you will know his name. He is no stranger at all to the insurance industry. He was the founder and vice chairman of Western Financial Group out in Alberta, and is now, as you probably all gathered, a senator up in Ottawa, and has a very unique and interesting perspective on both our industry and now some of the inner workings of government. So I'd like to invite Senator Tannas to come up and share some of his views on, I think, mostly catastrophe, but also probably a few other things. Thank you.
Graham. Hello, everybody. I gather we're running a little bit late, so I hope you don't mind if I talk while you eat. If my comments are successful, you will have lost your appetite by the end of it. It's a real honor to be here, and amongst all of you, so many of you being important and influential members of the insurance industry. And it is a great industry, one that Warren Buffett said quite famously that nobody ever got rich quick in the insurance business, but a lot of people got rich slowly. And I think that's true. It certainly was in the case of myself and most of those who toil in the distribution of the products that so many of you oversee in the insurance manufacturing sector. The point of our industry, though, is that we protect people at their most financially vulnerable time in their life. And I want to tell you a story about when I saw this for the very first time. I was in the travel business for the first 10 years of my career, and when my wife and I started a family, I wanted to go back to my hometown, High River, Alberta, and I wanted to buy a small business and live a great small town life. And my investigation of what business to be involved in, I had a little bit of money saved up, and I wanted to buy a business. It had some pretty simple factors to it, and I was attracted to the insurance business for a couple of reasons. Number one, because it's an inside job and warm in the winters. But also I knew it had a great lifestyle because virtually every insurance guy I knew was an excellent golfer. And so I thought there's a lifestyle that goes with being in the insurance industry in a small community, and I thought it suited me. So I bought an interest, ultimately a full ownership in a small insurance agency in High River. And it was not long after I got to work there, when I was learning the ropes, that a couple, Mr. and Mrs. Thurber, had their house burned to the ground overnight. And they phoned my partner at the time, the fellow I was in the process of buying out. They phoned him in the middle of the night, and he went to their place and met them while they stood on their front lawn. Their house a smoking hole in the ground. Fire department just cleaning up. And my partner said, look, go check into the hotel, the local hotel, and we'll see you in the morning. But this will be okay. Next morning, Mr. and Mrs. Thurber arrived at the office, and I was there. We were all there. There was half a dozen of us that worked at the office at that time. And Mr. and Mrs. Thurber came in. They were in their early 60s. And I've never seen adults so scared and so wary. I remember, like it was yesterday, Mr. Thurber had on a pair of jeans and a t-shirt, and he was holding up his jeans because he didn't have a belt. He said, "I don't own a belt anymore." And we had an insurance adjuster from the insurance company, Wawanesa, there, and they walked into my partner's office with all that fear and trepidation, and an hour later they walked out, standing tall and determined to face what was going to be a difficult task of rebuilding, but knowing that they had all the financial resources and support that they needed to do it. And from that moment on, the job wasn't about golf, and it wasn't about a nice small town life. I was truly hooked on this business and on the industry, and I was inspired to build something. Over the course of the next 15 years, I, along with many others, helped build Western Financial Group, which today sells $1.5 billion property and casualty insurance across 4 Western provinces. On behalf of almost 100 different insurers. We have 1,800 employees and about 750,000 customers, all from one office, now 20 years ago. It was inspiring in the beginning, and it was also fun along the way. I remember the very early days when we went public, mostly with friends and relatives and community members who bought shares in the early days, but we were getting going. And I remember one of my first strong recollections that we were kind of on our way and things were happening. And it was a day where my schedule, when I was having coffee with my wife in the morning, was, "Here's what I'm going to do today, dear. This morning I have to go to a client's house who was, in fact, my great uncle, never liked me. And I had to climb up on his roof with him and tell him why the insurance company was not going to cover the damage on his roof because of shoddy workmanship. Then I had to get down off the roof and race into Calgary to give an investor relations presentation to a group of stockbrokers because we were trying to raise money to grow. And then in the afternoon, I had to go out to a ranch and inspect the testicles of a prize bull and then write an insurance policy on it, all in the same day. Try and figure out how to dress for that day. But it was fun, and we built the company, and I'm so proud that the company today is vibrant and growing and continues to serve the customers in countless small towns across Western Canada. A few years ago, I stepped back into a role of vice chairman and founder. And I call this the Colonel Sanders role, because I don't do much and I never seem to go away. But it's a role I enjoy because it gives me a window into the insurance industry and allows me to continue to be connected to Western Financial Group. But I also felt that I could help and make a difference in public service. And so in 2013, I was elected by Albertans to go to the Canadian Senate. We in Alberta elect our senators, mostly. And I was appointed by Prime Minister Harper after being the choice of Albertans to go to Ottawa and be a senator, and I'm still there. And that's, I guess, what brings me here today. I have a foot in both camps, the insurance industry and in the government. And I think that in that way, I have a unique perspective that I'd like to share with you today. And I asked Joel, and I thank him for giving me the opportunity to come and talk to you, the decision makers of our industry. I want to speak to you about an issue that is hanging over all our heads in property and casualty in Canada. In fact, there's strong evidence to suggest that this issue threatens our country's entire financial system. I'm talking about the potential for an earthquake, likely in BC, possibly in Quebec, and not just a small earthquake, but one of a magnitude and in a location where the financial damages overwhelm insurers' ability to cover the losses. For the purposes of today's remarks, let's call that a big shake. I'm not going to spend a lot of time educating you guys on the size and scope of this risk to Canada. Most of you know the numbers better than I do. But let me quote a few salient numbers and their potential consequences. First, we know that the odds are pretty good that this will happen sometime in the next 50 years. And we know that today in aggregate, in total, the industry could likely handle a $20 billion event. And this is roughly where insurers are prepared with capital and reinsurance resources today. It also appears that at about $30 to $35 billion, widespread insurer default will happen, and the contagion could spread through PASIC to surviving insurers. Higher numbers would bring contagion to the Canadian banks, to businesses, and indeed to the national economy. We have heard about recent catastrophe models that have generated losses as high as $95 billion, 400% of what the current industry capacity is. And we should always remind ourselves that almost every major disaster in the last decade has brought about changes and upward estimates because we have underestimated consistently the damages caused by catastrophes. So we'll have higher estimates, I have no doubt, in the future, while our capital capacity remains more or less static. Now, there have been a number of excellent studies and reports on this subject, detailing the risks. There have been few solutions. But one study done by the C.D. Howe Institute has posited a solution that quite rightly has garnered favorable attention. This study, authored by Nicholas Lepan, calls for a financial mechanism which, after a certain point of stress, financial stress, in the industry due from a big shake, would trigger a government-sponsored financial backstop for insurers to access to continue to pay claims. If or how this backstop gets paid back, it's not clear. What is clear is that the envisioned backstop mechanism is by no means a replacement for proper capitalization, strong reinsurance, continuing good regulatory oversight, and appropriate risk rating by insurers. Far from it. After all, Nick Lepan was Canada's Superintendent of Financial Institutions, serving with distinction in that role from 2001 to 2006. He would never propose or support a scheme that facilitated any kind of reduction in the rigor of our current system. Rather, his proposed solution represents, in my mind, a very clear-eyed acknowledgement that the big shake risk is one that our industry simply cannot mitigate itself. So, everybody's with me so far. We've got a big problem. It's somewhere out there in the future. We've got an interesting, intriguing solution, still somewhat vague, but the solution involves government providing a significant, in fact, significant and unknown, infinite, contingent financial commitment. I submit to you that this situation is the perfect recipe for many, many more years of talk, study, and inaction. Why? Because our current situation features prominently the most beguiling force for inaction: the ability to procrastinate. Procrastination by the industry and procrastination by the government. Procrastination favors our leaders in the insurance industry right now. If I'm running an insurance company right now, frankly, the odds are that I can wait this problem out. that it can be the next CEO's problem somewhere in the future. I can tell myself and comfort myself today that we are doing all we can by having serious discussions with the government about the issue and promoting this concept that is out there that is a potential solution. In fact, and I just want to comment, I think there's been some unconfirmed reports that the big shake risk and possible solutions will be considered in the upcoming 2019 Federal Financial Regulatory Review, which, by the way, was postponed from 2017, procrastinated till 2019. And that review is apparently going to include thinking, talking, and trying to understand the big shake risk. So I guess if I'm an optimistic CEO, I can say, well, I can wait. I can hope that this issue gets onto the financial reform agenda, the next study in 2019. But colleagues, this is folly. Why? Well, there's a political reason, number one. There's a federal election going to happen in 2019. So any recommendation coming out of a financial review, if it isn't indeed postponed again because of the election, will not be actioned by this government. Instead, it will fall to a new government who will be fresh from the campaign trail with promises to fulfill and, as always, a bold, exciting agenda to implement. The new government will not likely be placing an implementation of a financial system review at the top of the agenda. And after all, why would politicians rush to roll up their sleeves and develop a big shake solution for the insurance industry in priority to all of their other election promises and items? After all, it can wait. We must also, I think, consider the bureaucracy, for they too will be tempted with procrastination. A problem like the big shake is not attractive for any member of the public service to tackle and champion. After all, this backstop mechanism solution is essentially an advance plan to bail out the insurance industry. This is the kind of project advocacy that is not good for one's career, I would suggest, if you are in the public service. It's complex, needs to be taken seriously, and the solution needs the kind of details that require a lot of thought, negotiation, and consultation. It's obviously extremely potentially expensive, and ultimately it will need legislation that will have to be championed by politicians within the government, and especially the Minister of Finance. And finally, while there may be a concern, there is no immediate crisis, and therefore there will not be any pressure ever to resolve this issue in advance, especially if the industry continues to sell earthquake insurance and shoulder the risk. So at every turn, I submit we have enormous potential for procrastination. So all this to say, in case you didn't gather, I don't think that we will ever see a solution if we wait for the government to proactively try and solve this problem for us. It's that simple. So I'm not here today to just trumpet the problem, but to lay out a tactical plan that would bring Big Shake onto the agenda and see the issue dealt with one way or another in the next 12 months. And here are my proposed 5 steps. I have to tell you that these steps are coming from the mind of a small town insurance broker. Somebody said every china shop needs a bull, and I'm it today when it comes to this proposal. So I've got 5 steps, and the first step I call shelling the beach. I call it shelling the beach because that's kind of a military term, right? Before you land, before the Marines land, the Navy shells the beach with artillery. Number one, to let the enemy know that we're coming and that we mean business. And that's what I think we need to do. Step 1 is that industry leaders need to acknowledge or actually refute the idea that what we have right now, our current situation, is not sustainable. That a solution must be found. And if we can't find a solution, that we will change our behaviors in ways that may not be in the best interests of customers, but will certainly be in the best interest of shareholders. So, a sample little couple of sentences that basically allow a CEO to admit that there is a problem here and that it needs a solution and that we can't keep going without a solution. Step 2 is to create and propose a fair resolution, a detailed blueprint of what this mechanism looks like. And here's how I suggest we do that. Number 1, we use our friends at the IBC or at PASIC or both to help convene and fund through their members a task force, but not just an industry task force, a 360-degree task force that involves decision makers from our industry, but also would assemble a straw man federal government. We won't get the government to the table to help us, but we could hire retired senior public servants, people from OSFI, people from finance, people from public safety, people from the British Columbia government, the Quebec government, retired finance ministers could come together and represent the government for us and allow a negotiation and a discussion and a plan to develop that actually will work for all parties, that will be the best solution given all sides of the issue. And we would give that task force 6 months to do it. Anything longer than 6 months, the plan will be too complicated. 6 months to develop an absolute detail down to the penny what this program does, how and when it does it. So that's number 1. Now we've got a document that is detailed as possibly can be, that has been vetted by all sides. Granted, one side being the government, it's people who are no longer in power, but were in power and can bring the right objections and the right perspective. So we will have a well-rounded proposal in which then to move. And those of us who are parents of teenagers, when they're always shuffling around and asking for stuff, I always say to them, bring me a plan I can say yes to. Whatever it is you want, detail out what my role is in helping you get it, and you tell me what you're going to do. We've now got a plan that people can say yes to. And we bring that blueprint report directly to the Minister of Finance. And we actually go to all the parliamentary committees and present it as well. We offer to brief any and all decision makers within the government on what the plan is, how we came about the plan, what the dangers of not doing the plan are. We also then set about getting our own industry and the key players in our industry to ratify the plan as well. The final step is that the insurance company leaders need to start moving from we've got a problem with no solution to we've got a problem with the solution. And if we don't have a solution soon, we're going to have to do something else. So step 4 is we put the heat on. We ask the government to engage with us within 90 days, to bring their most senior people to the table to negotiate, change, and ultimately recommend the solution. And we back that up with continuing dialogue with the Minister of Finance, with the Superintendent of Financial Institutions, with the committees, with the media. We use the opposition, whoever they are, to ask questions of the Minister of Finance in the House of Commons and in the Senate. All of those things to bring the item and the solution, the horrible catastrophe that could befall us all, and the brave solution that exists that will allow us to sleep easy. And then finally, as we're doing that, we actually get the insurance company CEOs to start detailing what Plan B looks like. Because in every leadership moment where you're convincing somebody to go somewhere that they wouldn't go by themselves, you have to paint a picture of how great it will be when you get there and how terrible it'll be if we don't go there. And this is where insurers need to talk specifically about what they plan to do if there is no solution. Some insurers will say, we're not going to insure earthquake anymore. When I first came in the business, earthquake insurance was hardly available. Nobody offered earthquake insurance. Now it's table stakes if you're in those geographic territories. But the answer could be, if we don't get this, we can't offer earthquake insurance anymore. We can't bet all of our shareholders' money, all of our employees' employment, all of our national policyholders' coverage on 15% of the population and less than 1% of the geographic territory of the country. We can't continue to do it, so we're going to remove earthquake coverage. That sends a signal to the government that says, well, if that happens, I'm on $1 of claims to do with earthquake damage. Some insurers may say, well, why don't we have PASIC exempt insolvencies caused by earthquake? They just won't cover it. So policyholders will be at risk. That's another way in which the government will have to decide how they want to manage that. But the rest of the industry says, we're not going to stand behind insurers that go insolvent by insuring in earthquake territories and with earthquake coverage. We could have certain insurers say, you know, this is supposed to be a voluntary program, PASIC. I'm going to get out. We're going to stand on our own. We're not going to be part of that program anymore. Or you may have insurers that actually want to say, in purpose, out loud to their shareholders and employees and customers, we're just fine with the way it is. It's great. If there's a big shake, no matter how big, we'll survive. We'll be fine. And that's perfectly valid. They'll have the right information to do that. Those are the 5 steps. I think that will bring the problem to light, bring it onto the national agenda, and bring about a potential resolution, or allow us to be secure in the knowledge that we're not going to get a solution within 12 months from today. So, there is my ham-handed tactical program to attack and solve this problem. And it's one that puts the onus on our industry and our leaders to propose a clear and detailed plan that is fair to all stakeholders. I believe it has a solid chance of success. But even in failure, it will create an atmosphere in which each individual insurer can determine their own best course of action to protect customers, to protect shareholders and employees, without waiting and hoping for a solution that likely will never materialize. I'd like to close by asking you all to imagine what it will look like and what it will feel like if we do not have this issue resolved and the big shake occurs. During what will be one of the most difficult times in our country's history, with hundreds of thousands of people struggling to cope with loss and devastation and personal tragedy, when local, provincial, and federal governments will be attempting to secure public safety, bring back basic services, and get critical infrastructure back online. Meanwhile, our industry, instead of standing tall in its finest moment, will be in a state of insolvency, hiding from paying claims, and hoping the government comes to our rescue. This scenario is frighteningly possible. It could happen tomorrow. It could happen next week. It could happen next month. Let's hope it doesn't happen before we take action. But I say to you, it is time to take action. And anything less, in my opinion, is a failure of leadership. Thank you.